Hey, welcome to the Informed Simplicity Project, a place for students looking for the informed simplicity on the far side of complexity. Today I have a great guest, and before we get into that, just wanted to let you guys know, of course, feel free to subscribe, to leave a comment, and if you enjoy this episode, let at least one friend know. All right, without further ado, our guest. Today I have Mark Andreas, who is a change maker. Recently wrote the book Waltzing with Wolverines. I guess I don't know if it was recent or not. It recently came onto my radar,
Few
which is
years.
which is probably it's probably the book that most new therapists should read. And I want to get into that in just a second. But before I do that, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, Mark.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Jordan, for having me. And yeah, excited to have the conversation. So I'm Mark Andreas, and just really brief intro on me. I have a personal change coaching private practice. So I work as a coach for individuals and families with teens and work both in person and online. And so I meet with people locally and around the world as well. And then I also do some personal growth trainings in the US and other countries,
How,
but mostly the private practice.
okay. So yeah, I tend to get a little people whenever I interview people like you, people end up saying the most interesting things. Um, and I have to ask the
Yeah,
question. You work via Skype or Zoom with families?
I do. Yeah. So it obviously depends on the family. It has to be a family where they are civil enough that they're all able to sit in front of one screen together. um, and so I can't say that I've actually done that. Um, I've done that a handful of times.
Yeah.
More often, I work with the parents, and the teenager doesn't necessarily have to be a part of it, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about and what the book is about is tools and strategies for parents to use with their kids. A lot of parents come and they want me to work with their kid and change their kid in some way, but their kid may not be interested at all.
Right.
And so I say, well, you're the motivated party here. I can give you a lot more tools you can be way more effective with your kid than I can, if I just teach you some of these tools, because you're with them 24/7, whereas I'd just be with them for an hour a week or so.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mostly do stuff out of your book.
Well, actually, a whole wide range of stuff. So if I'm working with families for, how do they kind of fix dynamics in the family with their teenagers, then it's the stuff out of the book.
Yeah.
It might be combined with some of the NLP change tools if they're identifying an emotional response, like blowing up with their kid or something like that they want to shift.
Yeah.
Um, but mostly it would be kind of coaching them in how to implement the strategies in the
Yeah.
book. And
Which,
then a lot of my other clients are just unrelated to the book. It's more personal change
yeah.
and personal growth related stuff. Yeah.
How do you, what do you see is the difference between working face to face and working virtually?
I'm amazed how well it works
Wow.
working virtually. I mean, my preference is to work face to face. And I always tell people, if you live locally, I highly recommend at least our first meeting be face to face.
Mhm.
But that said, as long as you've got a good connection, which is, if that breaks down, then it's, a different story. But I tell people, as long as you have a good internet connection, then my experience is that it generally works very well.
Do you see any difference at all, or is it just the same?
I would say that it's mostly a personal thing. Like some people specifically want to, like it's important to them to meet in person. And so that seems to make more of a difference, is the personal preference rather than the medium itself, in my experience.
You are blowing my mind right now. This has been a hot topic. The last one of the previous episodes I had was with a guy who's saying like this is the future, and the last interview I did was with a lady who did her dissertation on basically the digital future of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Um, And there are a few things that she's like, yeah, we need to watch out for this, this, and this. But for a lot of people, um, and I hear this often, they say that it works just as well online. And as a therapist who loves face to face, there's a part of me that hates that idea. There's a
Yeah.
part of me that hates it.
Yeah, totally.
Man,
Yeah, and this is also coming from a very experiential type of person too. So I much, that's my preference as well, is to be in person and off the screen. But I've been amazed how well it works, and the benefit of it is that I get to meet with people all over the world. So that's pretty incredible.
that's what she was saying. Yeah, that's the thing of people who can never get access suddenly have access.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
better than nothing.
yeah,
And if and hearing you talk, it sounds like it's almost as good as face to face.
yeah. I think so, and I think it, probably really depends on people. As a therapist, you would want to be comfortable with that medium too. Obviously, that's probably the biggest difference,
Yeah,
or what could make the biggest difference.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, man, let's go back to the beginning. As an opener, it's always good to get a picture. So, how did you get into the world of change work and NLP and all that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I grew up in a family that was teaching NLP. So my colleague Connie Ray Andreas, she's also my mother.
Yeah.
And my father, Steve Andreas, they both studied with John Grinder and Richard Bandler, who started NLP. And they were the first to hire John and Richard to teach practitioner training and
Wow.
master practitioner training in NLP. So, and they were the first to create a written manual of their teachings. So their initial teachings, they'd do a seminar, and there wasn't really a manual to go along with it. And so they created I think the first practitioner and master practitioner manual in NLP, and also published their um, most widely known NLP books as well.
Wow.
So um, and then at a certain point, and many others kind of further developed the field too. So John and Richard started with a lot of really good material, and then my parents and others further developed other processes, and through modeling people who are successful at certain certain changes, and modeling that and learning how to teach other people, basically.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up in that environment, and I didn't kind of grow up. I did grow up in that environment, and didn't necessarily think that I would go into NLP. That was not at all an assumption of mine growing up. I studied peace and global studies in college, and then I worked at this wilderness therapy company for a couple of years that uh, the book Waltzing with Wolverines is about. And then after that, I started um, thinking, you know, maybe I want to do this also, this NLP stuff. I've always been inspired by change, whether that's, peace and global studies is looking at more a macro or a group level kind of change. And my first book, Sweet Fruit from the Bitter Tree, is all stories of conflicts that people found unusual resolutions to, interpersonal conflicts. And in a sense, change work, NLP, therapy, coaching, that's all about the same kind of thing, but on the internal level.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's interpersonal, obviously, if we're working with families or couples or something like that. It's very much interpersonal. But even just on an individual level, it's the same kind of processes happening just within a person as opposed to between people. So I've always been fascinated by that. And so I at a certain point, I realized this is really a passion of mine, and I'm in a unique position here to get to learn a lot from mentoring from my parents, as well as the different connections that they have, and I'd be silly not to take advantage of it.
Yeah, man. When you were growing up, were you around it a lot. There are people who, are the sons and daughters of authors who, know that their parents do this, but they, like for most of us, you're not necessarily involved in your parents' job all the time.
Right,
Um,
that's true.
so were you involved in that growing up, or were you sort of doing your own thing, or?
They were very good about keeping business business, and if we were curious about something, then they'd be happy to share that sort of thing. But there was no pressure to, they wouldn't just sort of regale us with endless business stories or um, and I think that was fundamental to me feeling really good about getting into it.
Yeah,
um, but they would often have really kind of some of the those first inspirational change stories that are in the book. um, some of the first ones that I heard came from stories that they heard at trainings or from other participants. And so I was always fascinated by those stories. And sometimes, if I was bummed out about something, you know my dad might say, hey, do you want to try something out? And if I was in the mood to, then he'd show me some stuff.
yeah,
um, if not, then that was cool too. So there
yeah.
was no pressure.
I mean, that sounds awesome, like the best of both worlds. Sort of like
Yeah,
an open hand. If you want it, you can have it. And if not, you know,
yeah,
it's not for everyone at every moment. It's just
yeah,
how things
totally. Yep.
are. That's cool, man. I mean, I think the question that comes up is like, I would I would almost be not, I don't know what the word is. I just have this like image of like, you know, you as a little kid trying not to be around Richard Baylor. That guy can be intense at times. It can be a little intense. Calm down, man. Like I'm just trying to eat my ice cream. Like change now or whatever. Like all right, calm
Yeah,
down.
actually, I think I wasn't really around him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't have any memories of it, and I
Of
think
those.
I don't know that he was particularly interested in kids, um,
Probably not.
and I don't think there were very many times. I don't know if I ever even met him as a kid. Actually, I should ask. Yeah, I should ask my mom.
Yeah,
Possibly as a small child in the
yeah,
back of one of his trainings or something, but I don't think I ever met him.
yeah,
Certainly not when I had working memory.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you went into you said global reconciliation studies?
Peace and global studies.
Peace and
So
global studies. So
yeah.
that also is fascinating because as a hobby of mine all throughout grad school, I was studying a lot of nonviolent resistance,
Yeah.
tactics of that. So what was that
Yeah.
like to study that for you?
It was awesome. I loved it. Yeah. And the school that I went to, Earlham College, it's one of the few schools where they actually have a full program, tenured faculty and a core curriculum and everything, which is pretty awesome. Because a lot of places it's sort of interdepartmental or cobbled together in some way.
Yeah,
And they had fabulous teachers, and yeah, I thought it was amazing studying those nonviolent movements and all kinds of stuff.
yeah. And so how did you go from that into working with a wilderness therapy program?
So always had a love of wilderness as well. So grew up in the country, um, and just always enjoyed hiking, backpacking, nature stuff. And then my college also had a really strong wilderness program. So I did that as a incoming student, a month-long wilderness program. And then it's also a unique program in that it's completely led by other students of the college. So then several years later, I got trained to lead the program a couple of years for the incoming students for those years. Um, so those are two passions of mine, and so I thought, how cool would it be to combine the two and be able to be out in the wilderness hiking and doing, helping uh, with this change work and helping people negotiate relationships and work together and come to more peace for them within themselves and with other people.
Yeah, yeah. Do you do you have a sense that a lot of your degree has lots of overlaps, at least in terms of themes with what you're doing in these groups?
Yeah, I would say I would say it definitely did. Yeah,
Yeah.
less in terms of, some of the classes involve specific strategies, like the negotiation class I took. Um, More of them were, studying the history of things and learning about um, international law and stuff like that, which is not quite as directly related to working with people in the field, um, but it all kind of informs, I think, just understanding human beings and the kind of trouble that we can get into and the kind of solutions that we can find and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. My undergrad was in international studies.
Nice.
Um, and one of the reasons I got into counseling was I wanted to do what I saw people trying to do on an international level, on an interpersonal level. And it
Nice.
sounds like for you, there were um, some of that same energy, right?
Yeah,
Wanting to look
definitely.
at peace and how we can relate better to each other, whether it's on a global level or whether it's on an interpersonal level.
Yeah,
That was
totally.
really, really, really cool, man.
Yeah. Sounds like we have a lot of parallels, actually. It's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Um, so this book, Waltzing with Wolverines, it's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. I think this is going to sound really, really weird, but I think it's very wise today. It's written in such a way that you can almost read a chapter or a principle,
Hmm.
and it's in like a 5 minute period, and so it's
Yeah.
almost bite sized in a way, which I think that for our generation is makes it more accessible. But there's so much here that it doesn't feel trite,
Mm.
fluffy. It doesn't feel it. There's still a lot of substance.
Hmm.
So how did you come to write the book?
Well, it was several years after having the experience of working in this program for 2 years. And just for the listeners, I'll just give a kind of, and you've read the book obviously, but just a outline of the program itself was uh, basically working with, it was a wilderness therapy program, and my job was I was actually leading a group of about 6 to 8 kids. I had one other co-leader with me, so we were the ones there leading the backpacking trip. We were there 24/7 with the kids, so we weren't their official therapists. We were very much their unofficial counselors and therapists. But their therapists would come in. So it would be a 3-week long expedition that would be um, with the kids, and the therapist would meet with them at the beginning during the first week, and then midway through the second 2 weeks. And the rest of the time they'd be with us. So we were really the ones on the ground 24/7, working with them when stuff came up, when arguments broke out in the group, facilitating their kind of therapeutic goals for being there. And the
Can
reason,
I slow you down for a second?
yeah.
So how many hours of psychotherapy do they actually have?
So the first of those 3 weeks was called Family Week, where we were still camping, but we were near Georgetown, Colorado. So during the day we would come into Georgetown, and they would do group therapy and family therapy for that whole first week.
Okay.
So there would be group sessions that involved all of the kids. There were 2 groups of 8 kids, and then there were their individual family sessions. And I'm trying to remember, they might have had like 1 or 2 family sessions, as well as the group sessions in that first week.
Okay.
And then there would be the 2-week expedition where it'd be away from Georgetown in the wilderness, and then we'd meet up with a therapist for a weekend during that time. And a lot of the way that therapy was structured is that the 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 whole group it would be fishbowl style. So the whole group of 8 kids would be participating, but the therapist would be working with one at a time in the middle on whatever their issue was. And that was actually a really powerful way of working because it allowed the kids to really support each other and get a window into each other's experience and realize, okay, I'm not the only one that has a family that is struggling. It worked really well that way.
And you hadn't done your NLP formal training at that point.
At that point, I think I did my practitioner at some point in the middle of that. Yeah, it was some point in the middle of that, my first practitioner
Wow.
training, and then it was after leaving the program that I did my official master practitioner.
That's got to be
Yeah.
fascinating because NLP is so much about breaking down anything into, many parts and seeing how the parts fit together. And so
Yeah.
being, being able to sit in sessions and watch and see what people do, which most therapists don't ever really get, honestly.
Yeah,
It
that's
has to be
really a
fascinating.
good point. It was yeah, like definitely valuable for me. And in the family sessions too, in the first week, they always wanted us to sit in on the sessions because then we would be, we'd be informed about what the kids were working with when we went out in the field with them. So as much as possible, we'd sit in with the sessions of the kids that we were working with. So it was yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a fabulous opportunity to see multiple different therapists working and yeah.
That sounds, I mean, I'm sure that there were plenty of times where you had paperwork to do or whatever, but that does sound like it was just, oh man, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, it was. And I think that was a lot of my draw to doing this kind of work too, was to like I wanted to get in there and just like see some stuff
yeah,
and a wilderness therapy program where most of the kids are forced to be there. They're not there on their own choice, which is certainly not the optimal.
right.
But basically the structure of the program is it's for families where they're kind of um, as a last resort, they're going, I don't know what what I can do to keep my son safe or my daughter safe, and so I'm gonna drive them up into the mountains and turn them over to you guys. Or sometimes people from the program actually came and woke kids up and said, "Hey, you're coming with us."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why this is such a powerful book for new therapists is because most of us, when we get out, I'll speak for myself. Actually, this is very, very true of people I've talked to in the field. We get out and we think, oh, I have a master's degree, I'm gonna go do X, Y, and Z. And then 99% of the time, we get jobs like that, you know, where we're entry level people, we're having to learn the ropes. But what we've been taught in a lot of classes is theory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of what this book does is it equips people with different tools on how to handle situations. And a
Yeah.
lot of what people do, especially entry level people, is either in home therapy of some sort or some sort of residential program. Um, and when you're doing that, and I found this out because I did in home and then I did a residential program, your skills as a therapist don't necessarily transfer over. Um, because I mean it often runs parallel, but it's a different thing to have to manage a group of people for an extended period of time rather than
Mm-hmm.
doing psychotherapy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about the book now, what parts of it do you feel like people have resonated with the most? What principles? What stories?
Um, I don't know that I've gotten that much specifics from people. But one thing that has definitely been clear is that the people who are the most, there's a certain group of people who are the most enthusiastic about it. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from a wide range of people. But the people who are like, oh my God, where was this book when I first started out in my job are teachers.
Mm.
And
Teachers have the same thing, right? You have the skill set of having to teach, You also have the skill set of having to manage a group of people, which is a
Yeah,
different
exactly.
parallel skill set. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And usually teacher, when I say teachers, usually high school or lower.
Yeah.
Um,
Not college age teachers, not
I mean,
professors.
I mean, it sounds like you like it too, um, but the ones who are like, wow, I really needed this when I started out are the middle school, high school teachers. And I think the reason for that is, and why this book resonates so completely with their experience, is that they're in a position where mostly there's not a whole lot of training on how to do the group dynamics for teachers. They learn how to be an English teacher or a math teacher, and they're excited to impart their knowledge and to the group, and then they show up and kids are misbehaving, or they're not ready to learn yet. And so then teachers are going, wow, what do I do here? And then to make matters more difficult, they don't really have any form of power in the situation to get kids to behave. So they're in a difficult situation because they don't really have much power at all, other than I might give you a bad grade, which only works for a small percentage of kids anyways. Um, and so they're in a position where they don't really have much power to control the group, and they don't have really training in how to facilitate the groups. And so then that can be a really frustrating thing when they're spending the whole time trying to manage a group that they haven't been trained to do, and they can't get to their teaching. And the Waltzing with Wolverines book is all about the tools that I found most effective in working with the wilderness group. It's a similar kind of situation where these kids are forced into the program. Their parents are saying, hey, you're going to be in this program, whether you like it or not. So they're not psyched to be there. They're not on board to begin with. And they're looking to push your buttons to kind of see how they can get away with stuff and how much um, room there is to just do whatever they want. And they're teenagers, and ultimately they're going to do what they want. There's no, they didn't give us guns. So
Right. Right.
the teenagers are going to do what they're going to do. And so in that kind of a situation where you really don't have very much power, how can you effectively manage and facilitate a group that's going to in a healthy way for them? So I think it very much parallels what teachers are often faced with, is how do you manage a group when you don't really have power to kind of or leverage to begin with.
Yeah. Mm.
You have to win kids over.
Leverage. I think that's a much better way to talk about it.
Yeah.
I like that. Um, when you use that word, what do you mean by that word, leverage?
Well, like for example, um, something that the kids want that you have power over,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So a teacher doesn't really have much of any of that.
Yeah.
And in the wilderness program, we did have one thing that was our main source of leverage, which was important, which was that if the kids were cooperative and played by the rules and expectations, then they could earn overnight time with their families when their families would come in every third week. So that was our one piece of leverage that we definitely milked for everything we could.
Yeah. I think that
But we were also dealing with situations that in a lot of cases were much more extreme than at least what a lot of teachers face. I know some teachers face stuff just as extreme or even more extreme depending on where they're teaching. But
yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that leverage makes part of the leverage makes part of the terrain very clear. Because I think that the reality is for most of us, once a kid turns, I don't know, 9,
mm-hmm,
12, even if we have all the power in the world over them, um, there's really only so much we can make them do. And I'm assuming that most of the parents of these kids had a lot of formal power over these kids.
mm-hmm,
Um, but, even that really is limited, which is part of why those kids ended up in that in that program, right? I mean, if mom and
Yeah.
dad take away the car or the phone or whatever else,
Yeah.
teenagers can still do whatever they want to do. And so
Yeah.
power in the sense of I can pull this lever and make you do this thing is a, a it's kind of a misnomer, but this idea
Yeah.
of leverage, and influence, I think is probably much more, what's the word, appropriate,
Hmm.
because all you can do in some ways is give and take away certain things, and their decisions are still up to them.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually gets to the prime, um, to me, what is the prime core of the book, which is this. Maybe I'll share a little bit of story of kind of how
Please
I
do.
came to that sort of the central the central key to all of the tools in the book, which is that in my first experience training with the wilderness therapy program for when I was training for my job, they gave us various child care tools, and they were very generally very good. But there was one that I ended up modifying. In my it may seem like a simple modification, but in my world it was actually very significant and big modification. So what we were initially taught was don't get into a power. So in terms of power, we were initially taught don't get into a power control battle with a student. But if you do get into a power control battle, win it. And whenever I talk to groups or tell people, people always nod their heads and they're like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And it made sense to me at first too. Um, so when I was on my second expedition with the kids, and I'm still a new leader, so I'm still feeling it out and wondering, okay, when am I going to be tested? My first group was pretty. They had all been there quite a while, and so it was a really high functioning group. And so I go out on my second group, and so I still haven't really been tested as a leader, and I'm not feeling fully secure in my position yet. And um, and I think a lot of parents and teachers can relate. So we were at the end of the day, we'd hiked into this meadow, and the kids set up their tents. They each had their own tents, and some of the kids got working on the meal. They cooked a group meal together, and then the routine was that I would give a journal assignment to the kids, like a 1 or 2 page journal assignment each evening before dinner. And so I went around and I told them the journal assignment, and one of the girls said, "I'm not doing it." And so, being someone who loves food a lot, I figured, well, I'll just say, well, you can have dinner as soon as you finish the assignment. Problem solved. That would have worked for me. Um, but apparently, not everyone loves food as much as I do. And she said, "Fine, I won't eat dinner," in that voice tone. So I'm going, oh, here it is. Here's my first power battle.
Yeah.
And so I go, okay, well, I failed at at the first part of the don't get in the battle. Here I am, I'm in it. So now I need to win it. That's what I was taught. And so I go, okay, I'm going to win it. So I said, well, if you don't do your assignment, I'm going to take away one of your overnights. These opportunities to go home and spend the night with her family at the end of the expedition. And she said, fine, take it away. And so I was like, oh crap, this is not going well. And so I said, well, if you don't do your assignment, I'm going to take away all of your overnights. And then I just left because that was all I had. But I felt really bad about it. I mean, in some ways it was kind of a minor situation, you might say, but it just felt all wrong. And so I went back to my tent and I was just kind of praying that she would do the assignment so I wouldn't be forced to take away all 3 of her overnights, which really I had blown things way out of proportion. And the whole reason that I got into this work was not so that I could, boss kids around and like force them with my power over their overnights to do certain things. Like that just wasn't at all why I had gotten into this kind of work. And so thankfully she let me off the hook. She did the assignment, but
You did one of these.
yeah, I was like, oh, thank you. You don't know how close you were to winning. um, or to us both losing, I guess, would have been really more accurate. And so after that experience, that really got me thinking, because I was like, okay, I don't want to ever do that again. That was not fun, and not nice. It wasn't in alignment with my values, you know. And so I kind of vowed to myself, okay, I don't want to ever get into a power control battle again, ever. And then something I went on break and then came for my next 3-week shift. And when I came on to the new shift, my boss was updating me about the group that I was going to take over. And he said something that got me thinking even more. He said, the group's doing great. The leaders have the group totally under control, and the group, it's like they think their leaders are gods. Wow. And I was like, that's a little weird. And you know, I could understand my boss being happy, because you know, his job I don't envy, because he was in charge of hiring all of us and then being kind of responsible for other people doing a good job. So he got to sleep well at night because he knew that the group was cohesive, they were following their leaders, and they were safe that way. But treating their leaders like gods, kind of a little bit weird. And and I had seen these other leaders work also, and their method of asserting control with the group was to get into power battles and win them. And they were very good at it. But what was the larger goal in this whole program? So it worked for the immediate goal of having a cooperative group that stayed safe. But what was the larger goal? Did we want to teach kids to just follow blindly whoever the smartest, strongest leader was? Or are we there to teach them how to think for themselves and, you know, participate and make the choices that are right for them? And so, yeah, so that really got me thinking even more about this general tenet of don't get into a power battle, but if you do, win it. And so I changed things to don't get into a power battle, but if you do get into a power battle, get back out of it. And what I realized was there's no rule that says once you're in one, you have to stay in it. And a lot of people feel like once they start down that path, they have to just stick it out to the bitter end. You know, I can't lose face and admit that I was wrong, or, you know, whatever it might be. And it turns out that that's just not true. And so in a lot of ways, a lot of the tools in that book are ways of once you, because everyone gets into them. But a lot of the tools are once you realize you're getting into a power battle, how you can get back out of it without just seeing it through to the bitter end where you end up with a lose-lose situation, or a situation where you may win, but it's at the cost of the other person's autonomy and kind of what's right for them. Yeah. And so what I ended up doing is in the future, when somebody would refuse to do a journal assignment or whatever it might be, I suddenly had a lot more options of what I could do. So what I realized is that the whole purpose for me being there in that program was to be supportive of these kids. So if I ever found myself in a dynamic where I felt opposite to them, I would just step back out of that and join the kid again in some form. So that might look like, you know, a kid saying, I'm not going to do the assignment. And I might just say, one thing I realized was that every sign of defiance is that underlying that is some need that's not being met. And so it's not like that they have something personal out for me, Mark Andreas, but there's some need.
Screw you, Mark Andreas.
Yeah, exactly.
College degree in your wilderness experience.
Yeah, which was especially clear to me working with these kids, because I'd meet them and 10 minutes into the conversation, they'd be cussing me out or whatever it might be. Obviously, that was not about me. There was,
You
something
and your
else going on.
breathing air.
Yeah, totally. So I'd say, oh, what is it what's your objection to doing the assignment? And often it was something really simple. It was like, I'm thirsty and I need to get a drink of water first. Okay, great. Go purify some water, then do your assignment. Or it would be like, I set my tent up on a root and it's really uncomfortable and I want to move it over. Okay, great. Do that, then do the assignment. Of course, it wasn't always that simple. Sometimes kids would just, am I allowed to cuss on this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. They did a lot. So normally I don't swear at all. Um, but in the program, some of the kids did a lot. And so, sometimes they'd be like, oh, this fucking program sucks. And so I would just exaggerate and do that even more. I'd be like, you think this fucking program sucks for you? Think about my position. You get to go home eventually. Like, this is fucking horrible for me. I have to come back here fucking week after week, and it's just insanity, and like it's making me fucking angry. And I take my hat off and throw it on the ground, and like pick up a rock and chuck it into like the ditch nearby or something. And the kid would be like, whoa, this is the guy who's in charge of us. And so that was one way that I often employed to stay on their side, just in a fun kind of way, to um, kind of mirror the experience and just sort of step into their experience a bit. It was a way of kind of um, mirroring their experience in a way that was fun for me. I got to like goof off, and it was kind of cathartic for myself.
So
But it really, yeah, it sort of shifted that whole dynamic. Yeah, go ahead.
so what did you see at the end of this? And I know I'm asking this question for a very specific purpose. On the back end, did your kids end up treating you like gods as well, or
No, more like people that they respected.
yeah?
Yeah. So
Would you
because
say that you had just as much influence over them as the other gods, quote unquote?
yes, yeah, a different kind of influence though that was more in alignment with their needs and actually meeting their needs, as opposed to a more forceful kind of control type of influence. Like they were more voluntarily part of this rather than we're going to go ahead and follow along with this because if we don't, we might get made fun of, or we might be outside the group or something like that. The winning it kind of was almost more like a bullying type of strategy in a sense.
Yeah.
Not that those leaders were bullies, but it was this weird power thing where they were just kind of asserting their control over the group, and then the group would go along with it, as opposed to, I'm going to win over your respect and we're going to do this together and have more of a democratic. So is really more of a democratic kind of group as opposed to an authoritarian one.
Yeah. And your sense
Yeah,
is that you were just as successful, but with less of the authoritarian sort of flavor.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I gotta say, I think that goes back to one of my, I don't even know what the word is, but something that I have wanted for a very long time.
Mm,
Part of the reason why I was looking into nonviolent resistance
yeah.
when I was an undergrad was to find a way to resolve problems without the cycle of violence continuing,
Totally.
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, and you would see, and you'd read about the history of different places, and I think the classic example, at least when I was in school, was Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being colonized,
Yeah.
and then in order to overthrow the colonizers, you'd have to have these sort of strong men who would arise. That
Mm-hmm.
sets in cycle, that sets in motion a cycle where, in order to, where that person eventually becomes corrupt,
Yeah.
and then another strong man must arise to overthrow that person, and then
Yeah.
they maintain
Yeah.
power, and so there's this never-ending cycle um, of oppression, of dominance, of
Yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
And in
Totally.
many ways, the nonviolent resistance movement is trying to address the same issues, but in a way that long-term things are sustainable. And
Totally.
it sounds
Yeah.
very much like what you're talking about of how can I
Yeah.
interact with these kids in a way that they don't leave here set up to obey the person who exerts the most force,
Totally.
but in a way that
Yeah.
evokes their own sort of skills and resources, and then they voluntarily want to do the things that we all need to do to survive in society.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. And so, like other times I might, sometimes if they said, "Oh, I don't want to do this assignment," or "don't want to do what you're saying," it's another tactic I could take that was also a different way of sort of joining with them is to go, "Oh, you don't have to do this assignment. You get to do this assignment. This is a privilege." And, be careful of the words that you write down, because years from now, generation upon generation of Monarch students, that was the name of the program, of Monarch students shall read your words that you set forth in this sacred testimony today. And, so just kind of having fun with it and playing with it, and in a lot of different ways that showed that this isn't about me making you do anything. And I'm not even interested in that. And of course, sometimes they would refuse. After I would try some different things and they would still refuse. And I'd say, that's fine. I'm not here to make you do a journal assignment that you don't want to do. And if you don't want to do it, then, that's between you and your therapist, and you can talk to them about why you think it's a stupid assignment and why you did something else.
Yeah.
And yeah, or sometimes I'd even say, write a 2-page journal assignment about why journaling is stupid. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you are teaching about this material and you're talking to teachers, and for new therapists, how do you deal with not necessarily the therapist's own baggage getting triggered,
Mm-hmm.
but the therapist or the teacher's ideas around power? Because what it sounds like is, in order to effectively use these tools, you would have to also make a fundamental shift in how you think about power, control.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you deal with that?
If I'm giving like a short talk, or like I've worked with some schools, I'd like to talk about the power of no control as sort of like a phrase to sum up the thing.
Sounds very
Like
Zenish.
like a Zen koan or something.
The power of no power.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of like I have this quote that I really like from the Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. And he said, "There's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will." So a lot of the time, what people talk about as power really isn't power. It's them hoping that they have power and trying to pretend that they do, and hoping other people will not realize that it's all just a facade. And so a lot of the way teachers or parents, people who really don't have a lot of power, attempt to have power is by trying to just assert their power and hope people go along with it, when they really ultimately don't have the power. It's really they're banking on the students' willingness to go along. And so actually, if we realize that we don't have power in those situations, then we're much more in tune with reality, and we can actually be much more effective at doing the things that we actually do have power over, which is what words come out of my mouth, what behaviors I take, and what actions I take.
Yeah.
So the power of no control is that kind of acknowledging where we really don't have power, and then we can be effective at the few places in life where we might have some, maybe not power, but at least influence.
Yeah.
And another quote that gets to the same kind of thing is that I like. It's kind of a paraphrasing of a Tibetan saying, which is, if you have a problem you can do something about, you don't have a problem. But if you have a problem you can't do something about, you don't have a problem. It's kind of that philosophy.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but that said, it's important to, have the tools. And okay, that sounds nice, but how do I actually have the tools to be influential where I can, or to make connections in the most effective way possible given the situation? And so that's
yeah.
where all the tools come in.
And I think that's why this is so. I think that's why it's such an important book. You know, so often I've seen people who have said what you said, and then they lack the tools to show how that's done.
Yeah,
And then people end up following them and either getting burnt out because it's not working, or they binge
yeah,
and become, heck, I'm just gonna go, become a god to these kids and force
yeah,
them to do what I need them to do because what else do I do? Um,
yeah, totally.
and so for me, this is, I mean, it's really important because those of us who want that long term results, right, where people
Yeah,
are invited into who they are and it's sustainable long term, we have to have tools.
yeah, totally. I'm
The
glad you said that.
the tools for aggression are very obvious, it seems like, but the tools for peace aren't
Yeah,
always as clear.
yeah, they're more subtle and more varied and more nuanced. And yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I think that's the other thing that a lot of parents and teachers struggle with is the I think they feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place, where either they assert authority over the group and deal with the consequences and problems of that, or they feel like if they don't do that, they have to just sort of let the group run wild, and it's just anarchy or something. Or with parenting, often you'll see the flip side of being the authoritarian parent is just being the parent that sort of lets their kids do whatever they want, and there's really no healthy boundaries for safety and the rest of it. And so, and I think then a lot of times, you know yeah, parents are going back and forth between, okay, which of these do I go? Neither of them seems very optimal.
Yeah.
Whereas really, with these tools that are in the book, my experience was that I was more effective with the group than I would have with either of the others, in terms of um, both in terms of the benefits of both of those strategies, both in terms of the obedience and cooperation within the group that I was able to foster, and also um, with fostering their own independence and thinking for themselves, and becoming effective
Yeah.
citizens ultimately. And it's a nice illustration of that too, is when I was first hired for the program, my boss, I really give him a lot of credit for hiring me, because initially he thought, this guy is not going to hold up under the pressure of these groups. Like, he's too nice, too kind of soft spoken, like they're going to just eat him alive. Now, I didn't know this until it was 2 years later, when I decided to move on to something else. And my boss gave me a big hug, and he told me this. He's like, I'm really going to miss you, because when you were out in the field, I knew, like, I could sleep well. I knew that the group was handled. And he said, when I first hired you, I thought the kids were going to eat you alive, because you seemed just like such a nice, kind person. I was like, how could this, I don't think he's going to last very long. But I gave you a shot at it, and you definitely proved me wrong. And so I think that's the key, is how can you be kind and caring and paying attention to others' needs, and at the same time have really clear boundaries, and every expectation or rule that you set, you're going to enforce it. And so that it's not either end of that spectrum of being either highly authoritarian or just like, whatever,
Yeah.
oh, you're running around threatening to kill someone with a knife. Oh, okay, let me know how
Okay.
that goes.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's what the book really is about. And I put as many direct story examples in there too, to try to make it really obviously illustrated and easy to step in and see how these things work, as opposed to just sort of the theory of it.
Yeah.
So as much as kind of woven through all of those tools are lots of different, just a story examples of me working with things that came up in the groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one more question before I move on to something else.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite tool?
Yeah, I would say probably meeting needs would be the first one. It's just the one that I already mentioned
Hmm.
um, about any defiance is really an expression of a need not being met. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times kids aren't going to be consciously aware of that need. They're not going to be able to say, hey, Mark, I just realized I have a need for blah, 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 and I'm wondering if you could satisfy that.
Yeah.
But it's going to come out as like, hell no, I'm not going to do that. And to realize, okay, that's not a threat to my authority. That's actually an unexpressed need. And to drill in and to sidestep the battle that you could get into and realize, oh, there's some need here, and going, oh, hey, what are you needing right now? I would
I see
say,
I see
yeah.
that with my son.
Mm,
I'm sure you'll see this soon as well.
yeah, totally.
He's almost one,
Uh-huh.
and we're teaching him sign, like baby, a few baby
Yeah.
signs.
Yeah.
And when he can't say what his need is, and we can't meet it,
Yeah.
he does like it's not bad, but he'll like start to cry and start to sort of flail.
Yeah.
But for the few signs that we've taught him, when he's able to say, "Oh, I need this right now,"
Yeah.
meet that need, we don't have problems, and it sounds like a very close parallel.
Yeah, totally.
And
Totally.
I have a friend who she says that that's the biggest issue between her oldest and her youngest.
Mm,
That her oldest didn't speak till he was like 3 for some
mm,
reason,
mm-hmm.
but the second was able to speak a lot earlier, and they were
Ah,
doing baby signs with
yeah.
him. And she's like, I think that's why my oldest had a lot of trouble and had tantrums constantly because he couldn't
Mm,
express what was going on. He
yeah.
couldn't get that need met.
Yeah.
So his only recourse is just to flail. I'm like, I'm in
Yeah.
pain. I need something, and I can't even talk about it.
Right. Make a big enough expression, and hopefully somebody will figure out what's
Hopefully,
needed
somebody
there.
will run through. Is he wet?
Yeah.
Is he
Yeah,
hungry?
exactly.
Just they'll start running through something.
Totally.
Um,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. Another favorite tool is, and this is one we were taught in the program, is if it ain't fun, you ain't doing it right. I like that one a lot, which is just a reminder that with whatever you're doing, to have fun with it. And if you're having fun, even if the kids aren't having fun yet, if you're having fun, that's going to go a long way um, to them being, at least to them eventually being more happy, and also to ensuring that you're not getting triggered and resentful and kind of
Yeah.
feeding a negative loop.
Yeah. I really enjoyed exaggeration.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it reminded me a lot. I read there's a book with John and Richard and Virginia Satir. She talks about
Uh-huh.
working with families.
Yeah.
And they talk a lot about exaggerating and um, as a way to sort of, I don't know what the word is, but to cut things off and to show how they are absurd in a way that doesn't alienate people.
Totally. Yeah, I think often kids were surprised to see that kind of reflected back to them. Like if I would start cussing up a storm or something, um, and it is a beautiful way. I think you put it perfectly. That it's a beautiful way. They get a certain reflection back of what that looks like from the outside, and so they get to. It's a very easy way to actually teach them to kind of step out of it a little bit and go, oh, that's kind of what I look like right now. Whereas before they were just caught up in it.
Yeah.
Um, and in a way where you're joining them, it's kind of fun and ridiculous, and and you're not trying to prove anything, and
Right.
the learning just kind of happens,
Yeah.
or at least there's the opportunity for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now? You're done with Monarch. You're doing some change work. What kind of work are you doing now?
So now I use a lot of the NLP tools. I use, if I'm working with parents or teachers around working with kids, then mostly it's focused on helping people implement. Like usually I say, read my book first, and then let's do some coaching calls, and I'll help you tailor these tools to your specific situation, or help coach you in what are the ones that are going to be the most helpful first off. And I love doing that. And then the other work that I do is personal change work with NLP tools, and some tools that are kind of outgrowth methods from NLP. So that would be core transformation and wholeness work, and that were both developed by my mom, Connie Ray, Andreas, and then also the transforming yourself model my father Steve developed, um, and also the metaphors of movement model, which is developed by Andrew T. Austin in the UK, which my next training in Boulder is going to be on that, the
Yeah.
metaphors of movement method.
The metaphor of movement stuff looks really interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It's fascinating, and it's a lot of fun too. And one of the things, I think one of the big, well, in a nutshell, what it is it's about eliciting our unconscious metaphors for our problems or stuck states, and using that understanding to gain insights into perhaps why our current attempted solutions aren't working and what might actually work better. So whereas a lot of previous metaphor work is about crafting some story that is going to relate to somebody's experience, or bring them from a problem state to a solution, to possible solutions, the metaphors of movement work is about eliciting our unconscious metaphors that we always already have for our problems, and then going from there. And so a couple metaphors I like to tell that kind of illustrate the usefulness of that is that in a lot of current, NLP or positive psychology, or outcome focused therapy, there's a lot of focus on the goal that we want and where we want to get to. And that's a lot better than where we started off, which was just focusing all on the problem. And like, okay, now we really understand the problem, but what now? Um, but if we just focus on the outcome, then we're also missing a step, which is where are we starting? And so the metaphors of movement work, in a way, is a very beautiful way of accessing our experience for where are we starting. Because if we want to get somewhere different, we first have to know where we're starting. Like if I want to get to Chicago, I can say, all right, great, I'll just go online, I'll buy a ticket to Chicago, done. And then I show up in Denver International Airport and my ticket is from Philadelphia to Chicago. It's not going to help me out very well. So in a lot of ways, the metaphor work is about gaining an access to our experience of where we're starting. That's really key to understanding where that really is before we take steps to get somewhere different.
Yeah. I love it. I love that idea. To me, it feels much closer to the client's experience than something that the therapist or the change worker is sort of imposing on the client.
Yeah. And I think especially because it's working with metaphor, it's accessing more the experiential, the unconscious, the non-dominant hemisphere part of experience that often when people come in for a change, they've already gone through the left brain problem solving, trying to figure it out or understand it. And that hasn't worked yet because here they are. And so often it's really the change needs to happen in a different part of experience. So it's really good in that way too.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, but it's fascinating work. It's amazing. I'm just even so I've been studying basically so Andy first began developing it in 2009, and we had him over to teach when he was just first kind of developing. It wasn't even a model really at that point, through to where it is now. And in working with people and over that time, I'm just constantly amazed by the 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 precision by which these metaphors relate and parallel to somebody's life and problem situation. It's kind of mind blowing actually how um, just how incredibly information dense these metaphors are, and every aspect of it relates to
Yeah.
something in their life.
Yeah.
And as the practitioner, I don't even need to know any of what their life situation is. I can respond to the metaphor and point things out about the metaphor that has them going, oh my God, like how do you know this
Right.
kind of stuff? Just to, maybe I'll give it like a quick example
Yeah.
if we have time.
Absolutely.
So, um, so I was working with a woman where her metaphor, she came in and she said, she said, it's like well, first she came in, she said, I know I'm creating this myself, but that conscious knowledge hadn't shifted it. And it was high blood pressure and anxiety. And she said, yeah, it's like I'm fighting. It's like I do all this work and then they change up the schedule on me and blah, 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 blah. And she goes into all of the content and but there was that little mini metaphor in there. It's like I'm fighting. So I ignored all of the rest of the communication. And I said, so it's like you're fighting. Like what? What's that like? And she's like, oh yeah, it's just like, and then as she got more into the experience of what it was like metaphorically, she said, no, it's not actually like it's not exactly like I'm fighting other people. It's more like it's all I can do just to stay in one place. It's like I'm running on a treadmill. And so, okay, so it's like you're running on a treadmill. What kind of treadmill? And as she's going more into the experience of what it's like, she goes, well, actually, no, it's not a treadmill. It's like a wheel. It's like I'm inside a wheel and and I'm running really fast, and it's all I can do just to stay where I am. And so, and she said, and there's wood shavings in the bottom of the wheel. So you can probably imagine what kind of a wheel this is. And so then the interesting thing is you can start to reflect back idioms that are true of that metaphor. So I said, well, it's clear that, she also said she had things she was holding on each side, but it was all she could do to just run, staying in one place. So I started reflecting back some idioms and I said, well, you've got a handle on the situation. She's literally holding something on each side. So you've got a handle on this, but you're taking all of these steps and it's all you can do. It's a lot of energy and effort you're expending just to stay where you are. And she's like, yeah. And I said, and it's like you're looking forward to the same cycle just repeating itself over and over and over again. And she's like, wait a second. No, I'm not. And I said, well, yeah, you are. Look, you're looking forward to this same cycle repeating itself. And she's like, oh my God, I don't like that, but I guess you're right. And so when you start just reflecting back these things literally true of the metaphor, it starts paralleling over, especially if you can use cultural idioms like that, paralleling over to their experience. And so, and so I said, and it looks like you're in a bit of a rat race, or at least maybe not a rat race, but, definitely you look like a bit of a hamster, just kind of. And then I said, actually, you can I wouldn't say this, but you can understand how somebody might say you're just somebody else's pet. Somebody that might look at you and say, oh yeah, you're just their pet. And you're like, ooh, I don't know if I like that very much. But it was resonating. And so then I said, so then I asked her, what is it that keeps this wheel going? And she said, I feel like it's some machine or something outside the wheel, but I can't see out there, so I don't really know. I said, okay, well, do you have any other thoughts about what it might be? And she goes, well, I feel like maybe it's something hidden underneath those wood shavings at the bottom. And I said, I think it might be something hidden under those wood shavings too. And she said, but I just have no idea what it might be. And I said, well, I think the solution is you need to get a hamster. And she said, because I was kind of surprised she wasn't picking up what was getting this moving yet. And she goes, I've never actually seen a hamster. And I was like, wow, are you serious? This is really amazing.
I've never seen a hamster.
And so I said, well, that's your problem. You need to get a hamster.
You need to get a hamster.
But she didn't like that very much. And so
they almost never do.
I said, well, if you, do you have any other ideas about what might be keeping this thing moving? And she goes, no. And I said, well, I think I know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you yet. And she said, well, I'm not going to pay you until you tell me. So I let her kind of think about it a little more. And then finally I said, well, I know that there's one thing that I know is hidden beneath those wood shavings. And there's one thing that I know that you know is hidden beneath those wood shavings. And that's your own feet. And she slapped the side of her chair and she goes, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? And I said, well, it's because the wood shavings were covering it up. But it's so interesting that when she first came in, she said, I know I'm creating this myself. So she had a conscious mind understanding of that. And yet in the metaphor, she wasn't making that connection. And so she was looking forward to the same cycle repeating itself over and over again. And so I told her to close her eyes, notice what it's like in the experience. And I said, you know, some people, they don't know what step to take, or there are too many steps to take, or they don't know what the right way to go. They don't know how to move forward or how to do what's right for them. In your case, you're taking too many steps, and you just need to take fewer steps. So just notice what happens when you begin to take fewer steps. And she, you know, you could see her visibly relaxing and calming. And when she initially came in, she had a pain in her back also that went away, and interestingly. And she goes, wow, it's stopping, like the wheel is stopping. And that was the session that we did. And interestingly, the next 3 weeks I checked in with her, her schedule had gotten even more, because they were building up to something. So the schedule had gotten more crazy. There was more to do, but she actually was feeling relaxed. Her anxiety was not an issue anymore. Her blood pressure came down, and it made that connection that she needed to make, that the conscious mind hadn't, even though it understood the situation that she was creating it herself, it somehow didn't, the connection wasn't made at the part of experience where it needed to happen.
Yeah. Did you do any follow-up activity with her, like go and do this for the next week and a half, or journal about this, or was that just the end of the?
So we had worked on, so it wasn't the first time I met with her. I had worked with her on anxiety and blood pressure before with other NLP tools, and had brought it had been dangerously high levels, and none of the medication she was taking was working for it. And so we had gotten it to where she was good to go. And then this sort of busyness in this project she was working on, things had kind of come back again. And so then we did that session, and then it was that resolved that. And then we did continue to work on some other things. And in our next session, the way she described it was that after that session, she realized she could step off the wheel at any time. And so she could just take a step to the right and just step off of it. And so that's kind of interesting. Now, one thing I will just mention, because it's important, is that with this metaphor work, there's not nearly always such a simple solution. That was a situation where literally she was creating it herself. She said so when she came in, she was aware of that. And so it was unusual in that there was a very simple solution within her control. And so obviously there are a lot of situations in life that are not that simple and not necessarily within our control either. So it's not that every metaphor session we find the one missing key and then everything just goes easily, because life is not like that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's a very useful way of connecting with kind of the truth of like, okay, this is where I'm starting. I wish I was starting somewhere else, but this is where it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool, man. Well, look, where can people find out more about you?
So my website is markandreas.com, and you can find out about my coaching and training there, and including this Metaphors of Movement training that I'll be teaching in January, February of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, man, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any
Yeah.
closing words or thoughts before we get off?
I don't think so. I already used up both of my quotes, so
Look,
should have
man.
saved one.
Yeah. You're doing important work. If I can help you at all in the future, let me know.
Awesome. You are too. Thanks so much. Been a pleasure.
All right, Mark. I'll talk to you later.